Phase is the word of the day, and today we're going to be talking about 3 methods of fixing the phase relationship between all of your microphones. This is something that most of us know can make or break a drum recording, or really any recording for that matter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 levels going from beginner to more advanced methods of fixing the phase relationship between your mics. We're going to start with the method that most people know and use. We're going to then move on to a method that is a little more advanced. And then finally, I'm going to show you a method that I only really learned of recently that has really been a game changer for me in the past year with my drum recordings. So I think there's something to be learned even for fairly advanced audio engineers, but for those of you phase lords that already know everything that I'm going to talk about, you can come along for the ride and, just get in the comments if I say something wrong. But in any case, we're going to talk real briefly about phase cancellation and why it's such a big problem, and then these methods that we can use to try and correct that and get the best possible drum recording when we're using multiple microphones. So phase and phase cancellation in a nutshell. The big problem is that if we have a waveform that represents many different frequencies, and let's say a wave does something like this where there are peaks and troughs, if that wave hits one microphone at a peak and then another microphone at a trough, you will get cancellation of certain frequencies. So what starts to become incredibly problematic is that drums and all instruments really emit a wide range of frequencies, all or some of which could be fully or partially canceled when they hit multiple microphones. So if you are recording, let's say, one signal like a guitar amp and you're using 2 microphones, it's not that difficult to mess with the phase relationship and get those 2 microphones to play nicely with each other. But with a drum set, we've really got a problem because we tend to use many microphones and we are playing multiple instruments that are all in different places. So on this kit right now, I've got 8 different signals that are coming from 8 different places in space. And then I also have a big slew of microphones. I think I've got 3 mics on the kick, 2 on the snare, I've got mics on the toms, I've got 3 overheads, 2 room mics, and then for whatever reason, a random microphone on the floor. And so all of the different frequencies that are being emitted from all of these different pieces of the kit are hitting all of those different mics at different points in time. And so it's just an incredible mess of frequencies that are being boosted, canceled, partially boosted. So again, it's just a mess. So as most of you know, that's the problem. How do we fix it? Well, there are several different methods for getting a more phase coherent recording between many microphones. And probably the simplest one, if you have heard of messing with phase at all, the one that you've probably heard of is by messing with the polarity switch on either a plugin or on a piece of hardware. Somewhere there's going to be a button that looks like an O with a dash through it. And what that does is it flips the polarity of your signal, which means that if you have a waveform that goes up and then down and then up and then down, it now instead is going to go down and then up and then down and then up. So that actually works perfectly if you have 2 waveforms that are completely out of phase and you want to get them in phase. The problem, however, for drummers is that, like I said, we have all these different signals and all of these different frequencies which are hitting all of these different mics at different times. So although yes, we can go to the snare mic and judge it against the overhead and just flip the polarity switch and see if it sounds a little bit better or a little bit worse, that is rarely going to get us fully phase coherent results. But let's try that and see how much we can improve a recording in this room. So one thing that I've done to try and set myself up for phase coherence before I even hit record is with all of these different microphones, I'm choosing a particular source as my reference, in this case the snare, because the snare to me is the most important part of the kit and I want that to be the most phase coherent. And what I'm gonna do is, like, when I have 3 overheads here, which I do, I want to pick a point on the snare and then make sure that all 3 of those microphones are an equal distance from the snare. Same thing with the room mics, same thing with the snare close mics, and you want to do that as much as possible. So with that as a given, let's see what a recording with all the mics just straight into the interface sound like, and then I will mess with the polarity switch on some plugins and flip the polarity of some of these microphones, and I'll see if I can get a slightly more phase coherent sound. And just for reference, a rule of thumb for you is that the more low end you hear in your signal, typically the more in phase your output is. Now, don't get in the comments about this. This is very much just a rule of thumb, and folks sometimes like to use the phase relationship to kind of be like EQ, and sometimes they want less low end. But for our purposes here, we're just going to establish that more low end probably means more phase coherence. All right, so let's hear microphone straight in and then messing with the polarity switch. Okay, so somewhat of a difference there, but like I said, most of you are probably doing this already. The next thing we're going to try is we're going to try using a time adjuster in Pro Tools to just nudge our signals by a matter of samples. We're not even talking about seconds, we're not even talking about milliseconds. We're talking about adjusting by a particular number of samples. So very, very small nudges in the signal. So what I can do is I can use a highlight function in Pro Tools that lets me see the distance in samples between a highlighted portion. So what I'll do is try and pick the very beginning of a waveform on two different microphones where one is slightly delayed, and I'll see how many samples that is, and then I will put a time adjuster plugin on the early mic, and I will delay it by that number of samples, and hopefully between that and also using the polarity flip switches, I can get even more phase coherence. So now let's hear the dry recording and then just using the polarity flips and then using the time adjuster plugin. Okay, so things are starting to sound better and better, and for the longest time, this is where my process stopped until recently I started using this third method that I'm going to show you in just a second. So the problem with using the time adjuster plugin is just that it's kind of a tedious process, and if I move my microphones at all, I have to redo this process every single time, and it can be somewhat tedious. That said, that process is free, which the next one is not. I recently became aware of a plugin that I think a lot of people are hip to, but I wasn't, which is called Time Align 2 by a company called Sound Radix or Radix. And sorry, the plugin is actually called Auto Align 2. So what Auto Align 2 does is it just listens to your signal. You just put this plugin on every single one of your tracks, and then you let it just listen to the signal and it decides everything for you. Ideally, it does basically the process that we just went through, but hopefully does it better than we would be able to, and just automatically does a phase correction for all of your signals. So for drummers, and especially drummers using many, many microphones like I am, this is a godsend. The only problem is that this is a fairly expensive plugin. This is $200, which is kind of spendy for a plugin, I know, and if it's the sort of thing where you're recording all the time, or if you own a studio, you might not even think twice about it, but if some of you are doing home recordings or filming drum covers or whatever it might be, that might be a tough pill to swallow, and I totally understand if you don't have the $200 to spare. That said, I do want to show you how well it works, and I'll just say out the gate that I'm not affiliated with the company at all. I was just so pumped to find something that worked so quickly and worked so well. So what I'll do is I'll create a third mix so that we can hear back-to-back the raw tracks, and then just using our polarity adjustments, then using the time adjuster plus polarity, and then both of those versus the Auto Align 2 signal. Okay, so especially going back and forth between the auto align signal and then the raw signal, I just realized when I used my free trial of the plugin how much I was leaving on the table every time I recorded. And so even though the price was difficult to stomach, it for me was well worth it, and I've been using it ever since. So again, I don't get any kickback or any money if you decide to buy that plugin, but we've also discussed some free methods of working on your phase coherence and your phase relationship. So hopefully the broader picture here is just to spend more time thinking about phase while you're recording. So hopefully you got something out of that. If you have any of your own methods or your own tips for making sure you have phase coherent recordings, let us all know in the comments. Let's get a dialogue, let's get a discussion going. But thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.